Our story begins not with a grand empire, but with a collection of small, unremarkable villages. Imagine, if you will, a cluster of huts perched atop 7 hills overlooking the Tiber River. This was the humble origin of Rome, a place far from the center of the ancient world's power. The traditional story, a vibrant myth passed down through generations, tells of twin brothers, Romulus and Remus. They were said to be the sons of the war god, Mars, abandoned as infants, and quite miraculously suckled by a she-wolf. This tale, while likely more legend than fact, really captures the spirit of resilience and divine destiny. It was a foundation story that spoke of struggle, survival, and a fierce, almost brutal ambition from the very start. The reality was probably more mundane, yet no less significant. Around the 8th century BCE, various Latin-speaking peoples settled on these defensible hilltops. They were farmers and shepherds, their lives dictated by the seasons and the need for security. The location was strategic, offering protection from raids, control over a key river crossing, and trade route. This early settlement was not a unified city but a patchwork of communities. Slowly, over many decades, these villages began to merge. They drained the marshy valley below, which would one day become the bustling Roman Forum. This gradual coming together was the first crucial step in Rome's long journey from a local settlement to a global power. These early Romans were a hardy and practical people, influenced by their more sophisticated neighbors. To the north were the Etruscans, a mysterious and advanced civilization from whom the Romans borrowed architectural techniques, religious rituals, and even the alphabet. To the south were Greek colonies, vibrant centers of philosophy, art, and trade that connected Italy to the wider Mediterranean world. Rome was a melting pot from its inception, absorbing ideas, technologies, and people. This ability to learn from and assimilate other cultures would become one of its greatest strengths. The city was not built in a day, but brick by brick, idea by idea, it began to take shape, its destiny slowly stirring. The first political structure of this nascent city was a monarchy. A series of 7 legendary kings, starting with the founder Romulus himself, are said to have ruled during this early period, laying the groundwork for Rome's religious institutions, its military organization, and its earliest laws. To truly grasp the immense scale of Roman history, it helps to see it as a long, unfolding journey with distinct milestones. Our timeline begins around 753 BCE, the traditional date for the city's founding. For roughly 2.5 centuries, Rome was governed by kings. This was the regal period, a time of establishment and initial growth. The city expanded its influence over its immediate neighbors in Latium, fighting small-scale wars and forging alliances. This era came to a dramatic end around 509 BCE with the overthrow of the last king, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus. The Romans, deeply distrustful of the power of a single ruler, vowed never again to be ruled by a king, setting the stage for a new form of government. The year 509 BCE marks the dawn of the Roman Republic, an extraordinary period that would last for nearly 500 years. This was the age of Rome's relentless expansion. The journey was not a smooth, uninterrupted march to glory, it was a grueling process of near-constant warfare. Rome first consolidated its control over the Italian peninsula, a struggle that took centuries. Then it looked outward, clashing with the great naval power of Carthage in a series of monumental conflicts known as the Punic Wars. Victory in these wars gave Rome mastery over the western Mediterranean, including Sicily, Spain, and North Africa. The city was no longer just an Italian power, it was becoming an international force to be reckoned with. The final century of the Republic, from roughly 133 BCE to 31 BCE, was a time of immense turmoil and transformation. The very success of Rome's expansion created problems its old political system could not handle. Vast wealth flowed into the city, creating a huge gap between the super-rich and the impoverished masses. Ambitious generals with loyal armies began to dominate politics, leading to a series of brutal civil wars. This was the era of figures like the Gracchi brothers, Marius, Sulla, and ultimately Julius Caesar. The Republic, torn apart by its internal contradictions, was dying. Its final breath came with the rise of Caesar's heir, Octavian, who would usher in a new chapter for Rome. With Octavian's victory in 31 BCE and his assumption of the title Augustus in 27 BCE, the Roman Empire was born. This marked the beginning of the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, a period of unprecedented stability and prosperity that lasted for about 2 centuries. The empire reached its greatest territorial extent under the Emperor Trajan in 117 CE, stretching from Britain in the northwest to Mesopotamia in the east. The story of Rome's political evolution is a fascinating tale, a journey through three systems: monarchy, republic, empire. Rome's earliest days, governed by kings, a practical necessity for a small emerging city-state. The king as chief priest, the king as supreme judge, the king as commander-in-chief. His power was limited, advised by a council called the Senate, made of leading family heads. The Senate outlasted the monarchy, became the central pillar for centuries. Kings built the state, their rule ended in tyranny. Romans despised the word king. That fear produced the Roman Republic in 509 BCE. A revolutionary idea, power moved from one king to two consuls, elected annually. Two consuls could veto each other, preventing concentrated power. The Senate remained the main advisory body, its influence grew. A complex system, elected officials, assemblies, a powerful Senate meant to balance power. It celebrated shared rule and civic duty, summarized by SPQR, the Senate and people of Rome. The Republic drove Rome's rise from city-state to master of the Mediterranean. Competitive politics pushed men toward glory via military conquest and public works. But success brought crisis. Territorial growth strained city-state institutions. Managing a vast multicultural domain proved hard. Wealth from conquest created social inequality. Powerful generals won soldier loyalty. They challenged the Senate. Civil wars followed. Out of the Republic's death came the empire. After decades of war, Augustus emerged. He avoided the title king, called himself princeps, first citizen, claimed to restore the Republic. Yet he built an autocracy hidden in republican forms. The Senate met, consuls were elected, but armies and the treasury answered to the emperor. This brought stability, ushered in the Pax Romana, a bargain, political freedom for peace and security, defining Rome for 500 years. No story of Rome's transformation is complete without two of its most pivotal figures, Gaius Julius Caesar and his great-nephew, Augustus. Caesar was a man of boundless ambition, a brilliant general, a gifted writer, and a masterful politician. He was born into the Roman aristocracy during the late Republic. He rose through the ranks using his charm, intellect, and strategic alliances. His defining moment, the conquest of Gaul. That decade-long campaign brought wealth and territory to Rome and gave Caesar a fiercely loyal, battle-hardened army. His soldiers were more devoted to him than the state, a dangerous political shift. His success made him a threat to the conservative Senate under Pompey. The Senate ordered him to disband his army and return to Rome. Caesar made a fateful decision. In 49 BCE, he led his legions across the Rubicon River, an act of open rebellion that ignited civil war. Caesar's military genius proved unstoppable. He defeated Pompey and then defeated other rivals across the Mediterranean. By 45 BCE, he was the undisputed master of Rome, made dictator for life, absolute power that shattered republican tradition. Caesar launched reforms. He granted citizenship to provincial peoples. He reformed the calendar, the Julian calendar. He planned massive public works. He meant to fix the Republic's deep problems. But his monarchical style outraged many senators who loved the old ways. They called him a tyrant who destroyed Roman liberty. On the Ides of March 15, 44 BCE, a group of senators, the Liberators, assassinated him at the foot of a statue of Pompey. They thought they saved the Republic, but instead plunged Rome into more civil war. From the chaos, Octavian emerged. Through ruthless politics and military victories, he eliminated Caesar's assassins and defeated his former ally, Mark Antony. In 31 BCE, his victory at Actium made him sole ruler. Octavian learned from Caesar and acted subtly. He publicly claimed to restore the Republic while secretly holding key powers. He took the name Augustus, revered one, and became Rome's first emperor. He ended a century of civil war, established stable government, and began the Pax Romana. Caesar tore down the Republic. Augustus built the imperial system that endured for centuries. The Roman Empire's astonishing success and longevity rested on several key pillars that provided it with, unparalleled strength and stability. First and foremost was its magnificent army. The Roman legions were the most effective and disciplined fighting force of the ancient world. A legionary was a highly trained, professional soldier who served for 20 to 25 years. This long service created a formidable esprit de corps and a deep well of experience. The army was not just a tool for conquest but also an engine of Romanization. When soldiers retired, they were often granted land in the provinces, helping to spread Roman culture, language, and loyalty throughout the vast empire. The legions built bridges, aqueducts, and roads, acting as engineers, administrators, and warriors. The second pillar was Rome's incredible network of roads. The saying, "all roads lead to Rome," was honestly a literal truth. The Romans were master engineers, and they constructed over 80,000 kilometers, about 50,000 miles, of high-quality paved roads connecting the farthest corners of their empire. These roads were a marvel of engineering, built in straight lines and designed for durability. Their primary purpose was military, allowing legions to be dispatched quickly to any troubled frontier. But they also had a profound economic and social impact. They facilitated trade, communication, and the movement of peoples and ideas on a scale never seen before. A merchant, an official, a traveler could journey from Britain to Syria with relative ease and safety, creating a truly interconnected Mediterranean world. A third, and perhaps the most enduring pillar, was Roman law. The Romans had a genius for jurisprudence. They developed a sophisticated and comprehensive legal system that aimed to provide justice and predictability for all inhabitants of the empire, citizen and non-citizen alike. Roman law was based on principles of equity and reason, and it covered everything from contracts, property rights, criminal justice, to family law. This legal framework provided a common set of rules that governed a diverse population, helping to unify the empire. The principles of Roman law were so profound and practical that they became the foundation for the legal systems of many modern European nations. Finally, Rome's power was sustained by its pragmatic and adaptable approach to governance. It was this combination of military might, infrastructure, law, and clever administration that allowed Rome to rule its vast domain for so long. Despite its immense power and the long peace of the Pax Romana, the Roman Empire was never without its problems. Its vast frontiers were under constant pressure. To the north, along the Rhine and Danube rivers, were various Germanic tribes. To the east lay the powerful and organized Parthian Empire, later succeeded by the Sasanian Persians. These external threats required a massive and expensive military presence. Wars were a constant drain on the empire's treasury and manpower. A major defeat on a frontier could send shockwaves through the entire system, destabilizing politics back in Rome and encouraging other enemies to test the empire's defenses. The need to maintain a large, standing army was a permanent and heavy burden. Internally, the system of imperial succession was a persistent source of instability. Rome never developed a formal, foolproof method for choosing a new emperor. Sometimes an emperor would adopt a worthy successor, as happened during the golden age of the Five Good Emperors. But often, the succession was a chaotic and bloody affair. An emperor's death could trigger a power vacuum, leading to civil war as ambitious generals marched their legions on Rome to claim the throne. The year of the Four Emperors in 69 CE and the later crisis of the 3rd century were prime examples of this deadly cycle, where the empire was torn apart by internal conflict, leaving it vulnerable to external attack and economic collapse. Corruption and bad leadership also took a heavy toll. Rome produced many capable and conscientious emperors like Augustus, Trajan, Marcus Aurelius, but it also had to endure the reigns of tyrants like Caligula, Nero, Commodus. These emperors could be cruel, extravagant, and dangerously incompetent. Their reigns were often marked by political purges, the squandering of the state's wealth on lavish spectacles and personal luxuries, and the neglect of serious administrative and military matters. Furthermore, the empire faced deep-seated economic and social problems. Its economy was heavily reliant on agriculture and conquest. When the empire stopped expanding in the 2nd century CE, the flow of new wealth from plunder and slaves dried up. The state still had to pay for its massive army and bureaucracy, leading it to debase the currency by mixing cheaper metals with gold and silver and raise taxes, which in turn caused runaway inflation and crippled the economy. The immense size of the Roman Empire, once its greatest asset, eventually became one of its most significant challenges. By the 3rd century CE, administering a territory that stretched from Scotland to Iraq from a single capital at Rome had become almost impossible. News of an invasion on the Danube frontier could take weeks to reach the emperor, and it would take weeks more for legions to be dispatched in response. The empire was simply too large, and its problems too numerous to be managed effectively by one man in one place. This realization led to experiments in shared rule. The state needed more than one center of power. the Emperor Diocletian, who came to power in 284 CE after a long period of chaos, made the most radical and decisive change. He was a brilliant administrator who understood that fundamental reform was needed to save the empire from collapse. He instituted the Tetrarchy, or Rule of Four. He divided the empire into two major halves, the eastern part, the western part, each with its own senior emperor called an Augustus, and a junior emperor called a Caesar. Diocletian ruled the wealthier and more populous east, while his co-emperor Maximian ruled the west. This system was designed to provide better military command on the frontiers and create a more orderly system of succession. For a time it worked, bringing a much-needed period of stability. Although Diocletian's Tetrarchy eventually fell apart due to renewed civil wars, the idea of dividing the empire persisted. The Emperor Constantine the Great, after reuniting the empire under his sole rule, made another monumental decision. In 330 CE, he established a new capital in the east at the site of Byzantium. He named it New Rome, but it soon became known as Constantinople, which is modern-day Istanbul. This move reflected a significant shift in the empire's center of gravity. The eastern provinces were wealthier, more urbanized, and more strategically defensible than the western ones. Constantinople was a Christian capital for a newly Christianizing empire, a clear break from the pagan traditions of Old Rome. After the death of Emperor Theodosius I in 395 CE, the division of the empire into an eastern and a western half became permanent. His two sons, Arcadius and Honorius, inherited the east and west respectively, and never again would the two parts be truly united under a single ruler. From this point on, the two halves began to drift apart, developing distinct political identities, economic identities, and cultural identities. The division was the beginning of the end for Rome in the West. The final century of the Western Roman Empire was a story of slow, agonizing disintegration. The term barbarian invasions can be misleading. It was not a single, coordinated assault but a long, complex process of migration and conflict. For centuries, Rome managed its relationship with Germanic peoples through diplomacy, trade, military force. Late 4th and 5th centuries, pressure from the Huns, a nomadic people from Central Asia, pushed the Goths, Vandals, Franks to seek refuge and land within the empire's borders. These migrations were on a scale that Rome's weakened state could no longer control or absorb. A key turning point was the Battle of Adrianople in 378 CE, where a large Roman army was annihilated and the Emperor Valens was killed. This catastrophic defeat shattered the myth of Roman invincibility. From this point on, the Western Empire was often forced to negotiate from a position of weakness. It increasingly relied on hiring Germanic warriors to serve in its own armies. These federate troops were often loyal to their own chieftains rather than to the Roman state, further eroding the central government's authority and military integrity. The defenders of the empire were now, in many cases, indistinguishable from its attackers. The 5th century saw the progressive dismemberment of the Western Empire. In 410 CE, the Visigoths, led by Alaric, accomplished the unthinkable. They sacked the city of Rome itself. While the city was no longer the political capital, the psychological blow was immense. The Eternal City, not breached by a foreign enemy in 800 years, had fallen. Over the following decades, other groups carved out kingdoms from former Roman territory. Vandals crossed from Spain into North Africa, capturing Rome's vital grain supply. Franks moved into Gaul. Angles migrated into Britain. Saxons migrated into Britain. Other groups settled in Spain and Italy. The empire was shrinking, its tax base collapsing, its ability to field an effective army disappearing. The end, when it came, was almost an anticlimax. The Western Roman emperors of the mid-5th century were mostly powerless puppets with real authority wielded by powerful Germanic generals. In 476 CE, the Germanic chieftain Odoacer deposed the last Western Roman emperor, a young boy ironically named Romulus Augustulus. Odoacer did not bother to name a successor. He sent the imperial insignia to the Eastern Emperor in Constantinople, signaling that a separate emperor in the West was no longer necessary. This date is traditionally used to mark the fall of the Roman Empire. In reality, it was not a sudden collapse, but the culmination of a long process. Political fragmentation, economic weakness, military decay. The Western Empire did not fall, it simply faded away. Though the Western Roman Empire ceased to exist as a political entity in 476 CE, its influence did not vanish. Rome's legacy is so deeply embedded in Western civilization we often take it for granted. It echoes in our languages, our laws, our architecture, our political ideas. The Romance languages are direct descendants of Latin, Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian. Even English is filled with thousands of words derived from Latin. The Roman alphabet is the script we use today. The idea of a republic, the separation of powers, citizenship, written laws, applied equally. Roman law emphasized evidence, equity, contracts, and formed the foundation for civil law systems worldwide. The Roman Senate and civic duty inspired thinkers and revolutionaries, founders of the United States, leaders of the French Revolution. Walk any major Western city, and you'll see Rome's ghost in its architecture. Romans perfected the arch, the vault, and the dome. They built the Colosseum, the Pantheon, aqueducts. Those engineering principles appear in government buildings, cathedrals, monuments. The planned city, grid streets, and central public spaces is a concept that Rome spread throughout its empire. Rome's greatest legacy, the idea of a universal, multicultural state bound by law, infrastructure, and shared identity. For 1,000 years, leaders from Charlemagne to Napoleon dreamed of revival. The Eastern Roman, Byzantine Empire kept calling themselves Romans for a millennium. The Catholic Church preserved Latin and the old administrative structure. The story of Rome teaches us about power, civilization, ambition, and decay. Even the mightiest empires are not permanent, yet their ideas and culture can echo in eternity.